Welcome to Break Free and Trust, a redesign for living. Join me, Chris.
And me, Jacqueline, for real conversations about life, death, and everything in between.
Learn to connect with your intrinsic power to grow and heal, how to laugh at your own humanness and not take life too seriously.
Through healthy conversations between the feminine and masculine, you learn how to harness the power of relationship and the mirror to befriend your shadow and to trust that any obstacle that gets in your way is there to help you grow.
Together, working at a practical level, you'll learn to trust that everything that is happening is for you, your growth, and ultimate freedom.
Our circumstances don't matter. It's only how we relate to them that does.
Get ready to befriend the wisdom of your body and the power of your mind.
Break Free and Trust starts now.
Welcome to Break Free and Trust, a redesign for living. I'm Chris.
And I'm Jacqueline.
And on today's episode, we're going to explore Jacqueline's most recent transformative experience. And I've observed many parallels with Joseph Campbell's The Monomyth of the Hero's Journey and what Jacqueline's been journeying through herself this past few months. But I also see it as a much richer and deeper experience in many respects. So we're going to explore that and more as Jacqueline shares her experience and wisdom in this episode. But before we jump into it, I just want to address that one of the motivation for this episode came from a beautiful blog that you wrote a couple weeks ago.
Thank you.
Yeah. And for those that are interested in checking out the blog that's associated with this episode, you can find these blogs, Jacqueline and mine, at our website, which is www.theway-healing.com. And you can also find us on Facebook under The Way. So let's start. Jacqueline, less than a week after our very first podcast, like I think a matter of a few days, you jumped in the car and you headed off. I'm going to call it on a journey into the unknown. Would you mind starting this conversation off by sharing that experience to what happened?
Yeah. Yes, and I have to say I feel a bit shy today. I feel like I'm on the hot seat. I'm not sure where to begin, except to say that in early September, as many of you have already heard, all three of my kids left to go away to school. And the boys were doing really well, and my daughter was struggling being away from home. And her struggle was increasing over time and got to a place where actually what I can say in hindsight and what I knew then too, but hindsight's 2020, is that it initiated a tremendous amount of panic in me. And at the time, I thought that I was getting in the car to go and take care of my daughter, which I was. But I didn't realize that I was also getting in the car and beginning a much deeper dive into some of the work that I think I was holding off on doing up until then. Does that answer, at least in terms of a beginning?
That's a good start, the setup. Yeah. And I was trying to think where to go next in terms of exploring the story. And one of the places I thought, well, we could work our way through the hero's journey. But, in thinking about it, I think the best place that I want to start is I want to start by my experience with you over these past 4 months and what I've witnessed. Does that sound okay?
Yeah.
Do you ever share that? Okay. You may not have heard some of this before.
Probably haven't.
So what did I witness? So I witnessed a tremendous amount of surrendering and letting go of the attachments that I think that you'd define yourself with. So people, places, things, and your role to go off and do this journey. So that's one thing. I witnessed you diving into an intense daily practice right out of the get-go in Calgary. It involved, journaling, yoga, breath work, the presence process for hours a day. I witnessed that. I witnessed you boldly facing the parts of you that, let's call them hidden, uncomfortable, rejected, and I witnessed you facing them with a complete fearlessness. That's what I observed happening. And what's the outcome that I'm observing now is I've observed very much a shift in being. And what I mean by that is I see a sense of a new freedom in you. I don't know how that lands. And feel I feel a shift in your energy signature and consciousness in a very profound way. And we can get more into that later. And I think I've witnessed you or feel you have changed the way you relate to the world in general. So that's my felt experience with you. And then I just noticed you dealing with external events in your life in a very different manner all around. So I'm going to stop there and turn it back over to you to ask how that landed with you and what into anything you want to comment on there.
You know, I feel very, I'm humbled by what you say. Um, and I feel very seen. So thank you. Um, I think that all of those things are true in different ways. And, I often, you've heard me say so many times, and we talk about it with our students too, that this whole idea of to be seen is to become.
Mm-hmm.
And you just gave me a really sweet gift there. So thank you.
Pleasure.
Yeah. Yes, you know, um, learning happens at really funky, interesting times in our lives. And we're brought to different places for different reasons. And I think that what happened, or I know that what happened for me, is that the universe sort of conspired to create all the right circumstances to create space for me. And what our initial plans were in the fall when all of the kids left was clearly not what was needed at the time. Because in going to Calgary and leaving everything behind, space was created. Um, you know, I got to be with Layla, and you came and spent time with us as well for a big part of that. Um, but my days were really open. And while I had work to do and clients to be with and other things to do, I had a tremendous amount of space. And that space was in a city that I didn't know anybody other than, well, I knew two people. I had no obligations. Nobody had any expectations of me. We didn't have a home to manage. And so I didn't have the usual distractions that would normally exist for me to avoid myself. So actually, while my daughter was at school for 10 hours a day, I was alone. I did a lot of talking to myself.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and there it was almost like it was welcome. I was ready.
Right.
I was ready to face I was ready to face me.
Before we go there, because I'm hearing I'm visualizing this environment of solitude. You're about to face yourself. You mentioned that the universe conspired to create these conditions. Can you comment more on that? What do you
Sure.
mean by that? What conditions?
Well, I mean, all of a sudden in September, you and I were going to be on our own. Three kids that live with us were leaving. We had plans to go to Bowen and spend most of our time on Bowen Island. Um, to teach and to create and to do different things. And we had moved all of our, I mean, essentially, most of our life was there, and we had plans to be there for a few months. And then all of a sudden, Layla needed help.
Mhm.
And Layla needing help, um, Layla needing help started a process that um, was for her, but it was also for me.
They're going to challenge you in this or question you in this. Do you think that process potentially had already started within you?
Oh,
And
yeah.
we think of the Joseph Campbell's The Hero's Journey, and it's this move from the known world, what we're doing, who we are, the routine. Something happens, an event. And it could be small, but it could be huge. That that gets us to cross the threshold in this new unknown world. And I wonder if you've been identified as a mother with kids at home for 18 years, and that all of a sudden changed. All three kids were out of the house. Do you think that was a contributing factor to this, your internal readiness for this shift?
Yes. And yeah, I mean, I
Mhm.
had been sort of playing with that whole idea for
Mhm.
6 months, right? Because I knew that that was coming up, and I knew that it was going to be a big one for me. Um, but I actually think the process started a few years before that.
Mhm.
So, um, about 3 years ago, I gave up most of my client base as a therapist and moved into doing a lot more teaching. In early summer last year, I gave up a daily practice of teaching that had become a huge piece of who I was and what I was doing. Um, and that again, that also was, I was guided to do it. It wasn't like I had spent a lot of
Mhm.
time thinking about making a decision. Each of these places of sort of letting go of what I now understand on the other side of it was I was letting go of pieces of my identity
Mhm.
that were coming from outside of me. So the way in which the roles I was holding, where all of a sudden it was like, an arbutus tree just sort of peel, like its bark just sort of naturally
Yeah.
falls away, or a snake sheds its
Yeah.
skin. It was like, I think it's more like the arbutus tree though, because it was slowly like pieces were
Yeah.
starting to come
The
undone.
letting go here and there. Yeah.
Yeah, because for me, in my experience up until now, anyways, who knows what happens tomorrow? There wasn't some major event that happened that brought me to my knees where everything was stripped away from me like it was for you.
Yeah.
This has been like a real slow process of a natural unwinding and a natural unfolding. And so looking back, the stage was set, and there were different pieces that were happening slowly because that's probably how I needed to digest it in order for me to be able to hold it. And now this piece shows up, and so much had already been let go of that it was like, now it was time. And it was time now, not just to do a little work, it was time for a deep dive. And the scene was set perfectly for a deep dive to happen. I just didn't know that that's what I was getting into when I went.
Yeah. Well, you make that interesting parallel of again, just bring it back to the hero's journey where you make this jump from what we know to what we don't know, the unknown and the journey. It's about letting go of those pieces that are our identity, which you talked about. And I think whether it's this slower process that builds up or it's this complete crisis of confidence that brings us to our knees, I think the element that you're talking about is a surrender.
Mm-hmm.
There's a surrender happening, and in a sense, when I look back at your journey, it's like you getting in the car that day and heading to Calgary, going to a city where you don't know anybody, you don't even have a place to live yet. That's not where your work has been. It's not what your plans have been. That was a complete surrender. Like, this is happening. I surrender. Let's see what happens next.
Yeah. And, absolutely. Um, it was a beautiful example of surrender. And I think there's probably there's there's another way to speak to it too, which is I just entered flow,
Mm,
right? Like I was being called, and literally I was being called by my daughter, but also I think the whispers were already there. And so I let go of the way that I thought things were supposed to be and just entered flow. And the most beautiful part about that is that it was a bold move. Um, and it all happened very effortlessly. And I think that that's one of the most beautiful pieces of surrender is that when we let go of our agenda and we actually allow the current to take us where it's calling us, life happens through us instead of happening to us. So I will never forget that first few days of being there and staying in an Airbnb and then realizing that, okay, I was going to stay there for months and I needed a place to live. And I mean, I think it'll go down as one of my favorite stories around surrender is that I picked up the phone to call a friend who works in Calgary to say, hey, do you have any idea of location, area, suggestions of where to live? Um, and I called the wrong person. And as soon as I called the same name, but the wrong person. And as soon as I recognized that I'd called the wrong person, I hung the phone up. And it wasn't a few minutes later that the wrong person called me back. And the wrong person was the right person because he happened to be a developer in Calgary who had just built an apartment building
mm,
and was so incredibly generous and kind and put all of the show suite furniture into an apartment for Layla and I so that we had a furnished suite in 2 days.
and as unbelievable as that sound, this is a true story. That really did happen this way within hours of you looking for a place.
Yeah.
And you said, I really liked what you said there about so the word surrender can bring up this visceral response with some people because it has this connotation of weakness or giving up or whatnot. You've described it a different way, which I love. It's it's just entering the flow. It's agreeing to let the flow carry you down the river without needing to swim to the side or fight against it. That's another way to see surrender. And when you in surrender, I think, and in flow, the miraculous can happen.
I think that when you're in surrender and in flow, the miraculous does happen.
Yes.
Because I think that what doesn't happen when we're swimming upstream, which is what most of us do most of our lives, is we resist what is because there's something about what is that we don't like and we think it's supposed to be otherwise. Is that when we let go of our need to control what is and we actually come into a place of acceptance of what is, we are naturally carried on a current that wants to bring us home. It's not like, you know, I think we spend so much time in our lives fighting where life is bringing us
Mm-hmm.
that our energy goes into resistance more than it goes into creation. And so this experience was one of many that I've had, but it's probably the most profound that I've had
Right.
of allowing.
What's your deepest surrender, most likely?
Yeah, one of them
One
for
of them,
sure.
yeah. Yeah, and just I'll juxtaposition it to my own, experience with surrender was, you know, resisting up until the very point where recognizing that actually one more of my own thoughts is gonna just completely eradicate me. So I have no choice but to surrender. But then having the same experiences as you had in that sense that once I did that and let the flow of the current start taking me, all these amazing things and miracles started entering my life. I'm going, God, it was that easy all along. Why have I been fighting for so long?
Yeah. Well, because we're good at fighting. Our egos love it because we think we know better.
Yeah. Well, speaking of the ego, um, let's bring us back to where you got to it when you're talking previously. You're now in this apartment in Calgary overlooking the highway with lots and lots of time on your hands. What happens there?
Lots of discomfort. So I think it's, I mean, I think it's worth speaking at this point that um, I'm a student of a process called the presence
Mm-hmm.
process. And I say that because I've been living that process for a couple of years. And it's a beautiful, it's a beautiful piece of work. It's a book by Michael Brown. Um, and it's a 10-week sort of deep dive into presence. And what happened during this period of time is that I think I was able to actually digest this process on a different level, um, which is maybe a conversation for a different time. But what happened is I came face to face with a tremendous amount of discomfort. So I came face to face with insecurity, um, about who I was and what I had to bring to the table and what I had to offer. I came face to face with deep insecurity in terms of trust, um, in myself. I like to project it outward onto you a little bit. Um, I think what really happened is that I literally walked away from my life. So I didn't say goodbye to my life, but I walked away from it. So I walked away from friendships, which defined who I was on a big level. I walked away from my environment and my work environment, which defined me in a really big way. I walked away from, I had slowly been walking away from purpose and how I showed up in the world. And and I walked away from all of my possessions, which was actually was kind of fun because I went with a little bag and realized I didn't really need much more than a little bag to be okay. Um, I didn't walk away from being a mom because I was very much showing up as a mom, but it was time for me to show up differently as a mom. And in the process, I came face to face with a tremendous amount of physical and emotional discomfort. I spent a lot of time walking in the forest, which we found behind our house or our apartment. And I couldn't hide. I couldn't hide from me. So all of a sudden I was forced to feel. And I was forced to feel really deeply. And it wasn't like I was forced to feel feelings that made sense and had context. I was actually coming face to face with physical discomfort, like the kind of discomfort that makes you want to crawl out of your skin,
Mm-hmm.
the kind of discomfort that would have you go and do anything that you could to avoid yourself. So, whether that was, any kind of distracting behaviors, but there was nothing to distract myself with.
Mm-hmm.
There was just me. And so I started feeling all of
Yeah.
them.
Which you?
Yeah, that's a good
Because
question.
I'm gonna ask it a way that it makes it more specific for me to understand. The way my brain works is like in a way I see it as you left a character that you were playing behind to go to this new place, and then you had this ability to look back at this character. And what did you find? Does that resonate? Right.
Yes.
Okay.
And I think before I answer what
Yeah.
I found,
Yeah.
I think I want to speak about the character that I left behind
Okay. Yeah. That makes sense.
because I think that it wasn't a character. It was me. It was, it was everything, everything that I had done in my life to avoid being with myself. All of the unknown masks that I was wearing,
Mm,
the the roles I came to play so that I didn't have to see what was underneath the surface. That's what I left behind. What I left behind was the person I had created. And I thought she was me,
yeah.
right?
Gurdjieff calls it the thousand eyes.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Yeah. The
And
thousand eyes. Yeah.
yeah, uh, that makes absolute sense. And what I came to realize was that even the parts of me that I loved the most, the parts of me that were nurturing and that took care of people and loved to care for people, there was something under there too that needed to be
Mm-hmm.
found. So that needed to be stripped. And so what I came face to face with was honestly, I think she's the purest version of me. I think that she is the part of me that existed probably when I showed up on this in this incarnation in this world. Um, prior to any wounding, let's say, prior to any life experience. So prior to the need to armor and
Mm,
mask. And she was raw,
mm-hmm.
raw because, for me, we all have our own shit. This is mine. And mine was a story I've told myself from the time I was a little girl was that it wasn't okay to need.
Mm-hmm.
So neediness on every level in me was something that I had judged and had hidden away. Yeah.
Yeah.
And what came to fruition was that the part of me that was needy, the part of me that needed, it was time for her to be paid attention to. And she was going to be paid attention to by no one other than me.
Mm. You're parenting yourself. You're reparenting yourself in a way. I don't know if that does it
Yeah.
justice.
I think that there's a whole lot of talk about the inner child and reparenting. And I'm not sure why there's something about that that kind of,
I'm not an inner child person either, so it's okay.
well, but we do all
Yeah,
have
yeah,
inner
yeah,
child,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
Like there is an inner child within each of us. The language of it for some reason it just
Mhm.
kind of, I don't know, it feels very new agey. Um Here's what I will say, and then maybe we take a break and
Yeah.
come back, is that what I was being called to do was to show up and be my own best friend.
Mm-hmm.
I'm kind of giggling as I say it because it feels a little bit like a lot of the images of Pooh and Piglet when you see them talking now is like I was being asked to show up and meet the parts of me that I had judged and had hidden away because I didn't think they would give me the love that I needed. And I was being asked to love them.
Yeah. Not as a child, as a best friend, the way you described it. Like it's a different.
Yeah. How about we take a break and then we come back?
Okay. Be back in a minute. Hi, everybody. We're back. I think where we left off, Jacqueline, you were talking about a tremendous amount of discomfort you were facing and what it was showing you.
Yeah. And I think it's a good place for us to come back to because we're living in a world where we believe that, well, our brains are programmed to move towards joy and away from pain. We live in a world that has every different, every different way on the planet to help us mute pain. And we're not taught how to be with grief, anger, sadness, pain. We're taught how to want to pop out of our experience and move towards being happy. And the circumstances and how they showed up for me and I'm only speaking for myself in this piece is that I was I was being asked to, and yes, I did. I chose to surrender to be with discomfort. And discomfort was uncomfortable, but it felt rich. It was, I knew that there was meat in there for me to explore. And because of the way that our world operates and the speed at which it operates, we're not often, we're not given the time, but more importantly, we don't take the time to be in those places because we have other shit to do. And there's all kinds of reasons for us to pop out of it. And so there's a depth of our experience that we don't tend to.
When you were in that experience, I want to stay with that, and you were feeling this discomfort. What was your what was your pull towards? What was your mind telling you that you should do to come out of this discomfort? That
Hmm.
like where you know what I mean? You know what I'm asking?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you know what? I
Mm.
remember walking one day, and when you spend a lot of time by yourself, you start to talk to yourself,
Mhm.
or I do, anyways. And I was walking one day, and I had this feeling of like, oh, man, like it's sunny and beautiful outside. I'm walking in the snow in the forest, and I'm feeling pretty down.
Mhm.
And I heard this voice inside of me go, oh, for crying out loud, look around you. Life is beautiful. Put your big girl boots on and suck it up. Enough of this. And that voice has hung out with me my whole life. And all of a sudden, I was like, wow, no, no, don't put your big girl boots on. Your big girl boots can stay right over there. Stop being so mean to yourself. Can it be okay that I feel sad right now? And can it be okay that I'm going to give myself attention in this moment, in this feeling, and just be sad? And something shifted for me. Something kind of gave. And I sat on the snow and cried.
Mhm.
And nobody was with me to see me,
Mhm.
and nobody needed to be. I saw me. And it was like the first time in my life that it was so okay
Right.
to not be okay, and at the same time to recognize that being sad didn't mean that I wasn't okay. It just meant that I wasn't feeling something that I thought I was supposed to be feeling. But
Right.
actually,
There's nothing wrong with your feeling.
there's nothing wrong with my feeling because
Mhm.
it's what I was feeling.
That's right.
And so this beautiful sort of this really beautiful lived embodied awareness of what we're so often fighting is what is. We're fighting to not be sad. We're fighting to not be grieving. We're fighting to not be angry. We're fighting to not be whatever it is that we are. And the surrender to the flow, I mean, emotion translates into energy in motion. The surrender to the flow is to allow energy to move through,
Mm-hmm.
to allow sadness to be there, and to give it the attention that it's asking for so that it can continue down its way.
Can it also be? I mean, it's interesting. We've talked about this before, but it's like feelings and emotions aren't necessarily the same thing. You can feel something without putting it in motion.
Say more. I don't understand.
I can feel sad, but I don't have to. So the feeling of sadness is that the feeling of anger is anger. I don't need to put it into motion. I don't need to act anger. I don't need to, but I can fully feel it,
So
but I
that
don't
is
need to
in
put it in
my
motion.
world, I would say, fully feeling it
Yeah.
is allowing it to move through.
Mm,
The what you're speaking about is reacting to it,
right. Okay.
right?
So that's
So
that's a good differentiation. Yeah.
it's like this idea of, can I respond to what's showing up inside of me without having to react to it?
Yeah.
And so,
Yeah, like letting everyone around now, I'm angry, so I'm going to act in
yeah,
an angry way so everyone gets that I'm angry. I can just be angry,
I can feel
feel it.
anger,
Mm-hmm.
and then I can and acknowledge
Mm,
anger,
right.
and I can let it move through. Or I could go even deeper, and I don't have to label it anger. I can just feel the physical sensation of
Mm-hmm.
discomfort in my
Yeah.
body, give it what it
It'll pass.
needs,
Yeah.
and allow it to move on its way.
Mm-hmm.
It's our resistance to all of this stuff that creates stagnation and
Creates
stuckness.
dis-ease.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think it's even like, I think it goes even deeper. It's not just our resistance to it. Well, it is, but it's the stories we tell ourselves about it, right?
Well, yeah. As Eckhart Tolle says, is it's one of the most profound lines I remember reading early on in this what I call my journey is that um, not acceptance of the present moment is a form of insanity. And it is. The present moment's happening. It's right now. This is how it is. And yet most of us spend our entire life resisting it, trying to changing it, wishing it was different, not doing anything about it, just wanting it to be different. And it's wild when we sit back and think about that doesn't make any sense at all.
And then we seek peace,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
which is impossible
Right.
unless you're in the moment, right?
Yeah.
Peace comes, deep
Mm-hmm.
peace comes.
Yeah. Or we start want things not to change, but the only constant is change. The present moment is always changing.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things I'm back to that original question I had about like dealing with the discomfort, wanted to change that. And I don't know if you remember this, but earlier on when you first got to Calgary, I remember I was still here and we had a conversation on the phone and you said, yeah, I'm here. I'm going to start 3 groups. I'm going to go find a place to teach yoga. It was a whole list of doing. And I just remember having that almost a question. Are you sure that's what you're meant to be doing there?
I'm not sure that's what you said. I think
what
actually what you said was, yeah, or you cannot do any of those
That's
things
right.
and just take some time for yourself.
Yeah, that's right.
And I remember saying something like, yeah, thanks for that. And I hung up on you because I wasn't ready to hear it, but it was absolutely true. Yeah. And it was exactly what I needed because my go-to was to make myself busy, to do the things that made me feel important, valuable, significant, that fed something, that fed my ego, that needed to know that I was worthwhile.
Because without that, did you believe you were enough? That's the question.
Or I think the truth is that without that, I was annihilated. Right. Because who am I without any of those things?
If you're not doing something,
who am I?
You are.
And and so, I mean, your comment to me then was an incredible gift. I remember calling you so excited because I had figured it all out. And you kind of, yeah, you handed it to me. Um, but I mean, what do we face when we do things like that? Like, so yeah, I faced the idea of total annihilation. I felt like I would be so deeply judged by my parents, by everybody. But what I was really being deeply judged by was my own stories about what made me of value, or as you would say, was I worth like my what would my worth be if I wasn't doing those
Yeah.
things? And something deeper than my ego was talking to me, and was talking to me really loudly. And I would say to you that in my experience in those 4 or 5 months in Calgary, what happened to me was ego death.
Right. And
Um,
what happened at the start was your ego was like, whoa, I see what's happening here. I'm crawling off I'm climbing off the cross here. We're not doing this today. We're gonna go right back into the doing mode. And something new stepped in and said, not this time.
well, it was time.
Yeah.
It was time for me to go deeper and unwind more. And I laugh because I was just saying to a group of people that I work with the other day that we talk about evolution all the time, but I feel like what's happened is a devolution. I think that it's a unwinding, it's a letting go. It's not a becoming,
Mm-mm.
it's a remembering.
Well,
And and did you want to say something?
I was just saying, like, what jumps out as me is this idea that we spend our whole life trying to become somebody, and then you know, at least I woke up one day and said, "My gosh, I need to become nobody."
Yeah.
That's where the peace lies. That's where the joyfulness lies. And I just need to be a human being, not a human doer. And I spent my whole life doing and achieving and trying to be something, to prove something to myself, that wounded part of me, that I wasn't enough, and realize I've always been enough. And I'm just meant to be here and have an experience. That's more than enough. Why haven't I done that my whole life?
Because we live in a world that doesn't teach us that that's important.
Mm-hmm.
And probably because we live in a world where each one of us tapping in and remembering the essence of who we are taps us into a creative potential that is so vast and powerful that in the structures that we have lived in for centuries, we wouldn't be able to be controlled if we had access to that power. And I think that there is a much larger movement happening out there where this remembering is happening. And we are what we value and how we value it has to shift because the present, our present circumstances, if I come back to what you spoke to earlier, are built on insanity.
Yeah.
They're built on us looking toward the future and toward the past.
Mm-hmm.
They have, there's, we have no access to the present moment, which means we have no access to our creative potential.
Yeah. As Eckhart Tolle says, the present moment is the kryptonite for the ego.
Oh, yeah.
So the ego is constantly trying to put you in the past or into the future, but don't pause for a second and just experience the present moment, because then it dies.
Yeah.
You can't live there.
And so I think what I'd love to share is that our collective discomfort is calling us home. The places that we are uncomfortable are the places where the gold sits. And we don't look there. We look outside. And so my my sort of my wish, and it's work that I will continue to do on myself and work that I will share with anybody and everybody that wants to spend time with me, is that our way home is not through happiness. Our way home, the doorway home, is through discomfort. And through that doorway, as Michael Brown will often speak, is joy. And the depth of joy isn't happy. The depth of joy is the capacity to meet ourselves in the present moment, in the gamut of our emotions and experiences. And it's the capacity to be with it all. And, if we go with that whole piece around the hero's journey that you keep coming up with, I just came home yesterday. So the return that he
Mm-hmm.
speaks about, he speaks to, you go on this big journey and then you return and you return home to life exactly
Yeah.
as it was.
And there's this abyss, which is the ego death,
Totally.
the reward that you talked about, the treasure, and then this return home.
And in that return home, there is this place where we are entirely changed, but we look the same. And we come back into our lives, which are the same. But then we get to live this new awareness in the same body in a different way. And and my guess is that part of the journey is probably equally challenging. Because how do we, without attaching to and grasping onto what we learned, how do we live what we learned in a world that reminds us of everything that we are no longer? And how do we live it in integrity and honestly without having to make it anybody else's?
Well, and it's all part of the same journey because it's once again that the return home, they call it the hardest part because this is where the ego, the old parts of ourself, comes back and says, "Well, this is my own old friend group. This is my old way of being. This is my old habits. What do you like uh, to get? I have to come back to that place of consciousness to enjoy those again because where I've moved to, those things don't make sense anymore. Maybe some of the people that were in my life are going to drift away and new people come in. And if we resist the change and we resist what's trying to happen and try to come out of the flow again, it's the slide back. So it's one of the hardest things is to hold that place of I'm going to use my a newfound consciousness. We're totally changed from the inside, but from the outside, we look the same to everybody else potentially. It's a very uncomfortable place to be.
Yeah. And it's really important in that place to find people and places and things that you do resonate with.
Yeah.
So that that level of internal peace is something that you can see reflected back to you and remind you of who you are at your core and remind you that it's okay not to have those old masks anymore.
You know, almost every predominant spiritual mythological story you look at it is some version of this, of the hero's journey in some context. And the way you describe this idea that listen, the joy the joy we seek, the freedom we seek is actually inside us. The route to it's through pain and suffering. But once we go through that, then we find this. the kingdom of heaven within us, or whatever language you want to use, this newfound joy. It's an inward journey. It's a lonely journey. And most of these spiritual stories or whatnot, they talk about, years in the desert, time in a cave, in the jungle. It's always a period of isolation. It's not, I went to a fancy retreat center here in the story. It's a time of isolation and loneliness and facing our own demons and our own self. The dragon that's always guarding the treasure is a metaphor for the own demon within us. And then the return back and all these stories, just what you said, it's always about not being understood. Mm-hmm. Crucified in some, killed in some cases, but you're not understood. That's the same framework for all of it. And that's part of this journey, is getting good with not being very misunderstood.
Well, and I think it goes even deeper than that, which is that seeking to be understood is a behavior that will never, ever be completely met by anything out there. Mm-hmm. In the same way that none of our discomfort or pain is going to be resolved fully by anything out there. What we really need is to be able to come alongside ourselves, to give ourselves what we are needing, which is in reference to what Chris was just talking about, our own understanding. Mm-hmm. What we're looking for outside to be understood is all we ever craved from ourselves. And so this whole idea of being able to come alongside and understand your own experience and feel your feelings and hold yourself, what you're longing for, what we think we're longing for from someone else, is actually what we're most deeply longing for from ourselves. Mm-hmm. And when we can give it to ourselves fully, then we have access to understanding what peace can feel like inside. Because it's without the capacity to meet ourselves, we will live in a world that is scarce. Always.
Yeah. One of the ways that in this the realm of that thought, I learned to look at the world sometimes, and whether it's true or not doesn't matter. It's a way of being. Is I say, I might be the only one here, and all of this is just my projection. What is it I'm choosing to project? Because there's nothing separate from me that's going to change my reality. The projector's inside of me. Everything I'm seeing and the things I like and dislike, that's all a reflection of what's inside of me. That's where all the work lies. That's where the joy lies. That's where everything lies. And if I see the world that way, it becomes a beautiful, joyful place where I'm the creator of my own destiny. I can't possibly be a victim in that world. I can't possibly have self-pity in that world because it's my world. I've created it. It's my experience. It's my virtual reality. And it's fun when we take on that, when I've taken on that attitude, it tends to play out like that more and more slowly.
I think it's absolutely accurate. Mm-hmm. We are absolutely the creators of our world. And everything is a reflection or a projection, without question. And so, what is it? What is it that we're wanting to create is probably the biggest question that we have to ask ourselves. Yeah. What kind of world do I want to live in? Well, it's not resolving that is not going to go, it's not going to happen by going and looking outside and screaming and yelling about everything that needs to change. Where that begins, it's an inside job.
Yeah.
And it's time that we all start doing our own house cleaning in that regard. Because without it, we will never achieve the peace that we're seeking. And I'm pretty damn committed to creating peace inside and around me. And so are you. I mean, that's how you live. So if if this conversation creates a hunger to know more, reach out to us. Um, I can definitely tell you that the book, The Presence Process by Michael Brown, is a really beautiful way in. Um, yeah. And for what it's worth, spending that time going inside and facing my own demons, um, it's been some of the richest and deepest times in my life. And I wouldn't have changed it for a thing. So thank you.
Beautiful. Yeah. And just with you asked the question, we all have to decide the world we want to create. Uh, and I know what I want to create. I want to create a world of love. And I want to keep moving in the direction of love with everything I do. And I don't get it perfect, but I seek for progress and not perfection. And it makes it a pretty wonderful experience. So thanks. And until next time.
Have a beautiful day.
You've been listening to me, Chris.
And me, Jacqueline, on Break Free and Trust, a redesign for living.
Tune in every second and fourth Monday at 3 p.m. on Transformation Talk Radio for more real conversations about life, death, and everything in between.
Learn to connect with your intrinsic power to grow and heal, how to laugh at your own humanness and not take life too seriously.
Through healthy conversations between the feminine and the masculine, you will learn how to harness the power of relationship and the mirror to befriend your shadow, and to trust that any obstacle that gets in your way is there to help you grow.
For more information or to connect with us personally, visit theway-healing.com. That's theway-healing.com.